Welcome back to Medicine with Meaning with Dr. Julie Ta. Today, we're exploring something we all feel but rarely understand, the deep conversation happening between your gut, your brain, and your immune system. It's a story of science and intuition, of how your emotions can shape your biology and how healing the gut can heal so much more. Let's dive in. Dr. Julie, most of us hear gut health and think only about digestion. From your perspective, what's the deeper story? What does the gut actually do beyond breaking down food?
That's actually such an important question because the gut is truly so much more than a digestive organ. I often call it the command center of health because it influences nearly every system in the body, from our immunity and hormones to our energy, mood, and even our sense of calm. Inside our intestine lives an entire ecosystem. There's trillions of microbes that make up what we call the gut microbiome. And these microbes don't just help us digest food. They help train our immune system, balance hormones, regulate metabolism, and even produce neurotransmitters like serotonin and dopamine. In fact, about 90% of serotonin, that's the feel-good chemical, is made in the gut. And the gut and the brain are constantly in a two-way conversation through the vagus nerve and through chemical messengers. And when the gut is balanced, it sends signals of safety and focus and vitality to the brain. And when the gut is inflamed from stress, processed food, or lack of rest, those signals change, and we might feel it as anxiety, fatigue, or brain fog, and not just digestive discomfort. And there's also a deeper layer. The gut is exquisitely sensitive to our inner state. That is, chronic stress or emotional tension can alter gut motility, impact microbiome balance. So a calm nervous system helps to restore gut harmony. So when we talk about gut health, it's really about whole person health. When we nourish the gut with food, rest, connection, and mindful living, we're strengthening the foundation for not just physical health, but emotional and mental well-being.
Wow, this is so important. I know that many of us struggle with our gut health in different ways. The phrase gut-brain connection gets used a lot, not only online, but I've heard it with just conversation with friends as well. Can you explain in a simple but scientific way how our microbiome and nervous system communicate?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics because it really shows how deeply connected our body and mind are. We really can't separate them. So, I like to think of the gut and the brain as two best friends who are constantly talking. Again, they communicate through that vagus nerve, and it sends messages in both ways. And what's really surprising is that about 80% of the signals travel from the gut to the brain. In other words, the gut is actually leading the conversation. And we talked about the microbiome. And the microbiome is really important in producing all the chemical signals. So, for instance, the neurotransmitters we talked about earlier, serotonin, dopamine, GABA, these are the same molecules that influence mood, focus, and emotional balance. And we think of them, in the brain, but the majority of these messenger chemicals are in our gut. The gut bacteria also make what are called short-chain fatty acids, and these are really important molecules that reduce inflammation. They strengthen the gut barrier. They also strengthen the blood-brain barrier. And this is really important in protecting our gut and our brain from stress and toxins. So when your gut is balanced, it sends signals of calm and clarity. And when it's out of balance from stress, processed foods, or antibiotics, the messages change and you get inflammation, and the signaling becomes sort of noisy, and the brain may register that as anxiety, brain fog, or fatigue. So in a sense, that gut-brain connection is not just a catchy phrase. It is a living feedback loop. The state of your gut influences how you think and feel. And how you think and feel directly shapes your gut. And when we nurture that connection, again, through food, breath, rest, and presence, we literally create a biology of peace.
I like that term, biology of peace. I don't know if this has to do with what you're saying, but I've heard a lot of people that want to, this is like a side question, but if, a lot of people want to lose weight and they think they're doing all the right things, and they probably are, but they can't. Does that have to do with the fact that they're stressed about it, or they're feeling, does that influence the mind so that the gut doesn't work as well, even though they're doing the right things?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. Well, first of all, when we are stressed, digestion is impaired, right? Again, going back to that proverbial tiger that sets us into fight or flight, it's not a priority to digest in that moment. So our whole digestive system becomes impaired, and cortisol is released, and cortisol certainly contributes to weight gain. But what's not readily known is that the hormone GLP-1, which most people are very familiar with, that's the hormone that drugs like Ozempic and Zepbound and Mounjaro, it activates, it acts like the GLP hormone. And we all know that that's beneficial for weight loss, insulin sensitivity. We use it for diabetes. But what we know is that GLP-1 is a naturally occurring hormone in the gut, and it is influenced by our gut microbiome. And when we eat healthy foods, like, fiber-rich foods, fruits and vegetables, it stimulates our gut bacteria to produce short-chain fatty acids. And these short-chain fatty acids can trigger the cells in our gut to make GLP-1. And that's really beneficial for weight loss, weight maintenance. So there are multiple mechanisms at play, and certainly that whole stress response is one mechanism. But one that I want to highlight as we're talking about the gut is that, the gut microbiome is very important for producing the hormone GLP-1. There's another hormone called ghrelin. Ghrelin is our hunger hormone. And this is why rest and sleep are so important. When we are not well slept, or, we have a night where we don't sleep well, I think most of us notice that, you just become really hungry the next day. Like, you get really snacky, I call it. And that's because ghrelin increases when we're underslept. And, that just, causes hunger. Whereas GLP-1 is like the satiety hormone, makes us feel full. We have less cravings, especially sugar cravings. So our gut does influence our metabolism, vis-a-vis these hormones. And our gut is responsible for inflammation by triggering the immune system, and inflammation can cause weight gain. So there's multiple mechanisms, and I could dive deeper, but I'm going to stop here. Um, See if that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Um, that totally answers the question. And on that note, how does now that we're talking about stress in the gut, how does motherhood stress or career transitions influence gut health? And what did you learn from your own experiences about gut health?
Yeah. Well, I certainly experienced this firsthand during early motherhood. And at the same time, I was navigating career transitions. And even as a physician, I fell into the trap of pushing through exhaustion, surviving on coffee, not eating properly, skipping meals. And, my gut started to speak up, not just through symptoms, but through that sense of depletion, having fatigue, low energy, maybe even some mood changes. And though, motherhood and big life transitions are incredibly meaningful, they can be really stressful periods, biologically, that there's fight or flight going on in our body, from the constant giving and the multitasking. And it's a big change that we're adapting to. And often our own needs move to the bottom of the list. And, this is where awareness and self-care are really important, and, getting those foundational lifestyle habits in place. But I think most important is to recognize the stress on our body, and that this chronic stress puts us in survival mode. And in this survival mode, our nervous system, just prioritizes getting through the day rather than repairing or digesting. And so, there's less blood flow to our gut. It impacts our stomach acid, our digestive enzymes, our microbiome loses balance. And so over time, this chronic stress can definitely cause gut dysregulation and cause symptoms like bloating, fatigue, hormone imbalance, and certainly even mood changes. And it's because our gut, our hormones, and our brain are all interconnected. And for me, healing started when I started to listen to my gut, right? That gut instinct. And I learned that it's not just about, what we eat, though that is important, but it's really about how we live. And so I needed to slow down, set boundaries, practice my deep breathing, and honoring rest. And these are not luxuries, but this was my medicine. And then everything began to shift. My digestion improved. So did my energy, my clarity, and, certainly my mood and feeling a sense of joy.
And I feel like you mentioned that those things aren't luxury, like resting, but sometimes they do feel like it. Like for a lot of people, it's just taking the time to rest and feel and breathe do does actually feel like a luxury. And I was thinking about when you were speaking also, how certain changes that are meaningful can also bring stress. And many times I think that we often um don't think about that. Maybe you've been wanting a particular change or shift in your life, and then you finally get there and you're making a change, or maybe you wanted to be a mother, and so you're expecting that, you're waiting for that moment, but when it happens, it doesn't mean that because you wanted a positive change, it doesn't bring stress with it. Am I making
Oh, for
sense? Like,
sure. Yeah. I mean, I wanted to have children, and it was such joy, right, to experience motherhood. But it is a lot to balance. And just because you wanted something doesn't mean that when you get there, it's not challenging and difficult. And maybe, you feel a little guilty, like, well, this is what I wanted, motherhood and my career, my full career. But it is challenging to balance. And I think our society does put a lot of pressure on women to do it all, right? And women are so capable, and we often do take it on and do too much. And I think a lot of women feel guilty when we recognize or when it's apparent that it's a lot. And when our body starts telling us, certainly our gut, right, through digestive symptoms or hormonal imbalances or fatigue, then it's time to listen and see what our body is asking of us. And rest and slowing down, those aren't values that are supported by society, right? That, we're asked to be so productive. And I get that as, type A, high achieving people, it's hard to do that, but you need to see what your body is asking for.
Yeah, and that's so important. Like you said, like remove the guilt, because it's a right. It's a biological need to stop and rest, and it's also going to be beneficial to continue to create and build on whatever it is that you're working on in that time of your life, right? And
Yeah.
when for example, when you have a patient that their testing comes back normal, but they don't feel well in terms of their gut, what do you often see it's hiding underneath that?
Yeah, that is such an important question. And honestly, it's one of the most common scenarios that I see, where people come in saying, all my tests were normal, but I still feel awful. And it certainly feels incredibly frustrating. I think what people feel they're hearing is that, well, it's all in your head, but it's not. And often what's hiding underneath are functional imbalances. And these are the kind of things that don't show up on standard GI testing, because those tests are designed to look for disease, not necessarily dysfunction. So while the structure of the gut may appear normal, its function, that is how it digests, absorbs, and communicates with the rest of the body, can be way off. So it can be a microbiome imbalance. Too many of the wrong bacteria, not enough of the protective ones. Sometimes it's low stomach acid or low digestive enzymes or sluggish motility, meaning that, your food isn't broken down properly and it moves too slowly. Other times, the gut barrier, it's a very delicate lining that keeps toxins out of our system. It keeps the nutrients in our body. This barrier can become permeable. People have called it leaky gut, and this can trigger inflammation and immune reactivity and cause all sorts of downstream problems. So the deeper story lies in that mind-body connection that, again, chronic stress and emotional overload can literally rewire that gut-brain axis, and it can shut down digestion, or, at least, it causes gut dysfunction. And you may have symptoms of bloating or feel anxious or feel tired, but nothing shows up on the scan or, the colonoscopy or the endoscopy or blood work. And it's because it's hard to measure dysfunction. And, one thing that I've learned is that the gut is often the body's way of whispering to us, something needs to change. And it's not necessarily just what we eat, but again, how we live. that pace of our lifestyle, our stress load, and whether we're feeling safe in our body. So when I work with patients, I'm not just looking at test results. I'm looking at the whole pattern, their biology, their lifestyle, and their emotions. And healing happens when we restore alignment across all three. And when we think about true well-being, it's not just about having normal labs, but it's about feeling vibrant, grounded, and at ease in our body again.
And I think it's really important what you just mentioned, because disease is almost like the already at the end of the spectrum. Like, there's so many things that happen before that. And I think it really can take a lot of times to actually become sick. But before you're considered sick, that there might, not because you're not sick, it doesn't mean that your body's functioning at its best, right? And that's what you mean by it could be a functional problem and not a disease. And what comes to mind also again is the stress, like you mentioned at the beginning. If your body is stressed, if you're stressed, then you can't digest properly. So stress doesn't allow your body to function at its fullest.
I think, all of us, we want to feel good in our body. We certainly want to feel good in our digestive health. And, when there's dysfunction, we may not feel good. And I think that's certainly where, conventional medicine has some limitations. They're treating the symptoms and they're not looking at the root cause. And, they're looking for disease, right? And there's certainly a state, before you develop disease, or you may never develop, something like Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis. These are very serious autoimmune conditions of the digestive tract. And you may just be in this realm of dysfunction and not feel good. And that's a problem, right? I mean, we want to feel good in our body so that we can balance motherhood and our career. When we bring our best self, we certainly do a better job. And, that's something that I learned in my own journey was, not having disease is just not good enough. I want to feel good in my body, my mind, my spirit, if you will.
Yeah, I guess that's a very low standard. No, not being sick. Just not be, as long as I'm not sick, because people can spend a lot of time in that gray area, like you said. Yes, you're not sick, but you're also not feeling your best. And we have the opportunity to feel our best. So listeners, please know that you can feel your best.
Yeah.
Dr. Julie, do you have a story of transformation from a patient whose emotional healing created physical gut healing?
Yeah, there's one woman who really stands out in my mind. When she first came to me, she could hardly eat. Almost every food seemed to trigger symptoms, either bloating, fatigue, discomfort, or anxiety. And over time, she became afraid to eat at all. Everything triggered symptoms, and her diet became extremely limited. And all her tests looked normal, but clearly she wasn't feeling well. And as we talked and as I got to know her better, it became clear that her body wasn't just reacting to food, it was reacting to stress and past trauma. Her nervous system had learned to stay on high alert. It was as if the world and even food might not feel safe to her. So instead of focusing on what she ate, we began focusing on retraining her nervous system. That is, helping her body discover what safety felt like. And this was done through gentle breath work, grounding practices, and trauma-informed mind-body practices. And she slowly began to relax in her body again. And over time, something shifted. Her sense of safety deepened, and her gut became calmer. And she was able to reintroduce foods that she hadn't eaten in years, and her body was able to tolerate them. And, eating in the past felt stressful to her, but now it felt like moments of nourishment again. And so it was such a powerful reminder that the gut doesn't only digest food, it also digests experience. And when the body feels safe, the gut can finally do what it's meant to do. That is, absorb, heal, and support life. So this story stays with me because it shows that healing isn't just about food or supplements. It's about connection, trust, and creating a sense of safety within ourselves.
That's so powerful, this story, because the treatment or the path that you took was completely about her feeling safer in her body and her emotions again. And you didn't mention any sort of pill or nothing external, but how to mend what's going on within. And that just had a great impact. So that's a very powerful story. And the gut is sometimes called the second brain. How has understanding this changed how you approached anxiety, fatigue, or autoimmune conditions in your practice?
Yeah, recognizing the gut as the second brain has completely changed how I understand both physical and emotional health. And as we talked about earlier, we know that the gut and the brain are in constant dialogue through the vagus nerve, through the microbiome and the immune messengers. And so when I'm treating any sort of conditions, I often start with gut health. Especially those things that are thought of as brain health issues, right? Mood or focus. We often start with healing the gut because when the gut is inflamed or out of balance, it's going to influence our mood, our energy, our focus, and certainly immune regulation. So when I have somebody with autoimmunity, um, we know that the immune system mostly resides in the gut lining. Something like 60 to 70% of our immune cells reside in the gut lining. And very often our immune system gets triggered by stress, food sensitivities, or dysbiosis. And so the immune system can become confused. It can lead to chronic inflammation. And so supporting gut health is really important for supporting immune health and helping the immune system to re-regulate and find balance again. And same with, symptoms of anxiety, burnout, or fatigue. We start with healing the gut. Making sure that the microbiome is balanced. And of course, balancing the nervous system. When we do gut healing, we do start supplements. We give probiotics. Sometimes we give antibiotics to get rid of the bad bacteria. But none of that is going to work so well if we don't address that gut-brain axis, right? That the fact that the nervous system is so key for gut health. So I don't separate mind and body. They're interconnected, and really recognizing that there is a gut-brain immune axis. And so, anything that is impacted because immune system is dysregulated, you really want to start with the gut. This can include like skin health, for instance. Addressing gut health is important for eczema or acne, and certainly for autoimmunity.
I was just going to say, you mentioned I think it was last episode or something about being a two-way street. And I feel like the gut brain axis, or the nervous system, all that we're talking about right now feels like a multi-way street where you have to treat it with supplements, but also have to make sure that your stress is in check and all these different things. It feels so intricate.
That's where the holistic part, or that's the holistic approach, right? That sort of, you have to look at the big picture and that everything does matter, and it can feel really daunting and overwhelming and very complex. And that's why I try to simplify it, help people take one step at a time. And it is really basic. If you think about it, basic in the sense where, we want to eat whole foods, that are less processed. We want to have good rest, right? Sleep is important for gut health. We want to have connections, right? Good relationships that helps to balance our nervous system. When you put that all together, that can be very beneficial for gut health. So it's actually simple. It's not anything new, but I know in modern life, it can be hard. It's not easy to do. And I always say, just, start with one step at a time.
Yeah, I guess if you look at it from like the really big picture or everything that you have to solve, then it can become overwhelming. But one step at a time, it's an easy thing to do. And I think that when you do one thing, you'll already feel like you're a step closer. You already feel a little bit better, and that motivates you to continue, right? But I do
Yeah.
think, yeah, I do think that in some cases, when you're in the turmoil yourself, having someone to guide you, even if it's the simple things, can 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 just be transformational.
For sure.
And where do you think conventional medicine still underestimates the gut influence on the rest of the body?
Yeah. So, I think certainly conventional medicine is catching up, but there are still some gaps. And I think they underestimate how profoundly the gut influences the rest of the body. In other words, all the things that we've been talking about up until this point, that, the gut is so important for our mood, our energy, our hormones, and certainly immune balance. And conventional medicine sees the different organ systems as separate, right? You have the nervous system, the endocrine system, the immune system. But in reality, the gut sits at the center of it all. It's where communication, immunity, and metabolism all intersect. And I think that conventional medicine does not, quite understand, how profoundly this intersection is, and that there's this interconnection. I called it in the beginning, it's the control center of health. It's like the gut health is the foundation of health everywhere else.
Wow, it truly is very important how having a good gut health can probably just make you very strong human being and protect you from everything else. Um, Beyond biology, you spoke you spoke a little bit about connection. So how do community relationships and emotional nourishment fit into gut health?
Yeah. Our gut is profoundly influenced by our nervous system, as we spoke about, and therefore relationships and our emotional environment definitely impacts our gut. So it's not just food that our gut responds to. It responds to connection and safety. And when we feel supported and part of a community, our nervous system shifts into a more balanced state. And the vagus nerve, we've been talking about that a lot, it becomes more active and it promotes healthy digestion, nutrient absorption, and supports a thriving microbiome. And the opposite, when we feel isolated, or overextended and emotionally disconnected, the body interprets that as stress and our cortisol rises, inflammation increases, and we can think of that as the physiology of disconnection. And we now know that loneliness and chronic stress can alter the gut microbiome just as powerfully as diet can. And the beautiful part is that connection itself is healing. In other words, sharing a meal, laughing with friends, feeling seen and valued. These moments release oxytocin and serotonin. And this calms the stress response and it sends powerful safety signals throughout the body. So in my experience, gut healing happens when people begin to nourish not only their bodies, but also nourish their hearts and relationships. And that the microbiome truly thrives in an environment of warmth and belonging and joy. So gut health is not just about what's on your plate. It's also about who's at the table, how you feel while you eat, and whether your body feels safe and supported in daily life. And when we feed that connection, we're really feeding health.
It's super important what you just mentioned, because if you said um, feeling belonging, and that's a human need. Like, that's a human biological need, and it's not often talked about. So I really appreciate you bringing up community so much. And I resonate, and you just made me even think about my own life. Lately, I've been feeling very excluded with friends that I've had for a long time. And I see how it has impact my anxiety, like my mental state. It really, I don't think it's often talked about, but not, we think about even just like your relationships with your partners or your kids or whatever your family is. But even friends, community is very important. And yeah.
For sure. I mean, I can't tell you the immense joy that I have when I have a family dinner with my teenage kids. And it's because, they're busy, they're doing their activities, they're with their friends, and, we don't eat together so often as a family, but it's really important that at least once a week, we sit down as a family and have a family meal. And I think that certainly when I was growing up, that was the norm. Like everybody had a family meal. Like that was just what we did, many, many years ago. And now it's like, not the norm, and that I have to really prioritize this family meal and have that be a habit for my family. Otherwise it's lost. And it's the connection with my kids, teenagers. They kind of want to separate from their parents as they should, as they're learning about themselves and forming their identity. But it's really important that we connect. And as a mom, nothing brings me more joy than, being together as a family. And I know it's good for my nervous system and my digestion.
Hmm. It's replenishing, right? Even like that one meal a week, it just gives you power to continue, and it like fills you up, right?
Yeah. And it's important for them too, right? That we all connect, we're here for them. There's love and support. And that just helps everyone be healthier mentally, of course, but physically now we're learning, right?
And it's the safety net, right? That also contributes to our health. And um there's that saying, the gut feeling. How do you interpret that phrase? What is it for you in terms
Yeah.
of science and now what you spoke about, intuition? What is it?
I love that phrase, a gut feeling. Um, it captures something both ancient and deeply biological. So what we call intuition isn't just poetic. It's actually grounded in the way the body works. So the gut contains over 100 million neurons. There's a vast neural network known as the enteric nervous system, and it communicates with the brain again through the vagus nerve. And so it's sensing through the gut signals about safety, nourishment, and balance long before our brain is even consciously aware of them. In other words, the gut really does feel things out first. And when our gut is calm and healthy, those signals are clear and we can sense alignment, ease, or that quiet inner yes. But when our gut is inflamed or the nervous system is dysregulated, those signs can get distorted and it becomes harder to tell intuition from anxiety. So for me, a gut feeling represents that embodied wisdom. It's that integration of science and sensation and that self-trust. It really is the body's way of communicating truth. And over the years, I've seen that as people heal their gut, regulate their nervous system, they often reconnect with that intuitive clarity. They know what foods, boundaries, or decisions feel right. Not because someone told them, but because their body is communicating clearly again. So I see gut health not just as physical healing, but a return to that inner knowing. It's where the body feels safe and balanced. Intuition becomes accessible. It's calm, steady, and trustworthy.
This is so powerful, Dr. Julie. I maybe we can do an episode on this just fully sometime, because I see something that I was struggling with a lot when I was younger, a period of my life, and I consider myself a highly intuitive person, and at that point, I I was fighting with the fact that I couldn't distinguish what was intuition and what was anxiety. And that
Mm.
was a particular question. Like, you nailed it. That was my inner battle. So I think that maybe a lot of people go through that. And I don't know, maybe we can ask our listeners to drop a comment, and an emoji with a question mark if they want to talk more about this. If
Yeah,
they want
I think people don't realize how much the gut can influence our mind, right? Remember that two-way communication highway, there's more messages going back to our brain, and we want those messages to be clear and calm, and gut health is really important. So yeah, that gut feeling, you want to be able to trust it, and that's accomplished when our gut is healthy and functioning well, and our nervous system is calm and regulated. Then you can trust the signals, the messages coming from our gut.
And that's why it can be a journey to land into that.
Yes, it's a process, it's a stepwise journey. It does not happen overnight.
And so when people speak about a healing journey in a more emotional way, there's actually a lot of physical healing that it's happening in conjunction to that emotional healing. and vice versa?
Sure. Right? It's interconnected. And it's really false that the mind and the body have become separated in our Western scientific thinking. And we see here how truly integrated the gut and the brain are. You really can't separate them. What influences the brain influences the gut. The gut then influences back to the brain. And so it really is interconnected. And you're right, when people go through an emotionally healing journey, they may notice that they feel better in their body. And when we heal our body, namely, starting with our gut, when we heal our gut, we may feel better in our brain and our mind. So yeah, truly mind-body interconnection.
Once, someone told me that the mind is not in the brain, the mind is everywhere in the body. So,
Well, the gut exemplifies that, right? It's got this nervous system, that enteric nervous system that's sensing in our gut. It's producing serotonin and dopamine and all those neurotransmitters that are also used in the brain. There's more of it actually, like 80 or 90% of it is actually in the gut.
is there a myth about gut health that you wish you could erase from social media?
Yeah, that there's one simple fix, right? That there's one supplement or one probiotic that's gonna fix your gut. And certainly it can be very helpful in supporting gut healing. Especially, if there's imbalance of gut microbiome, due to antibiotics or having, an illness. But if your foundations aren't in place, like eating real food or getting enough sleep or managing stress or, having that community and connection we talked about earlier, even the best probiotic is not going to make a lasting difference. And that real medicine for the gut requires consistency, feeding the microbiome so that there's diversity and calm in our nervous system. And it really does require this multi-prong approach to healing the gut and feeling good. There's rarely one quick, easy fix. And I think that's, another sort of myth that comes from Western medicine is that, there's a drug that's going to fix everything.
Yeah. And having said all this, Dr. Julie, if there was something that you can leave our listeners with in terms of a practice or something, step one that they can start doing or experimenting with today so that they at least take a step in the right direction to feeling their best, what would that be?
Yeah. Well, a gentle place to start is with mindful meal practice or mindful eating. And so this is just the idea that, pausing to eat, right? I have a bad habit of eating on the go or standing in my kitchen, but it's important to sit down, pause, take a few slow, deep breaths. This will help get into that parasympathetic nervous system, which again is rest and digest, right? That activating the vagus nerve, shifting out of fight or flight. And when you're eating, to slow down and chew at least 20 to 30 times each bite. And I know that sounds painful, or not painful, but, excruciating slow. And so many of us just eat fast and recognize that chewing is really important for digestion. It is the first part of digestion. And slowing down allows our body to prepare for digestion. It sends, the signals to our digestive system to make stomach acid and secrete those digestive enzymes. And that takes a little while. And so slowing down. But I think the most important thing is just enjoying the food that we're eating, right? Notice the flavors, the textures. And this is all a part of a mindful eating practice. And you'll see, you may notice how delicious your food is, and it allows you to just be fully present with eating. And, we'll just get more enjoyment from our meal, and it'll aid digestion. And sometimes just slowing down and chewing 20 times will improve symptoms of bloating. Try it. That alone. But the whole process of mindful eating is just a really great practice for optimizing our digestion and practicing being fully present.
And I think that is also claiming that sacred time, our rituals to just enjoy something that was an accomplishment back in the day, to get food to nourish our bodies.
That's beautifully said. The sacred time. We don't think of eating as that. So thank you for that. Yeah. If we elevate it to sacred time, then we may make better food choices, right? Foods that truly nourish our body, or, foods that we know are, good for our microbiome and all the things that we talked about today. Colorful fruits and vegetables that have fiber and feed the healthy bacteria. So yeah, sacred time. And it's that pause, right? We're always in a hurry and rushing in modern life, and just pausing to have either a meal with yourself or with friends and family. And I think, we just don't do that often enough. And it's so important, and it, builds that community that we were talking about earlier. Yeah, sacred time. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Julie, for another really fulfilling and thoughtful conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to leave us with before we close this episode?
Well, I always like to say that this podcast is for educational purposes only, and that people should speak to their own doctors about any symptoms that are coming up. And I wanted to just say thank you. This is a beautiful conversation, and I so enjoy speaking with you, and to all of the listeners. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Julie, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Medicine with Meaning. If you took one thing from today, let it be this: your gut is more than a system. It's a storyteller. Listen to what it's saying, and you might uncover what your body and your life truly need. If this episode resonated, share it with someone you love, and see you next time.